Hello everybody, welcome back to another video by DissociaDID. This is Chloe and this channel is dedicated to educating people about mental illness and specifically dissociative identity disorder and erasing the stigma that surrounds it. Today I'm going to be talking to you about PTSD. If you haven't seen our videos on PTSD, we have two. One of them is a Debunking DID, which means that it's full chock-a-block of scientific information, biology, and lots of studies that you can check out in the description of the video. All the medical journals, every resource we found is linked. So if you want a huge full overview of what PTSD is and how it works in the brain, please go and have a look at that video and you'll find it up here. This video specifically is going to be about different types of flashbacks. If you already know about PTSD, then you'll know that flashbacks are something that happens because somebody with PTSD has experienced a traumatic event, and because this event was so traumatic, the brain essentially disabled or put hold on its memory processing abilities to make sure that the fight or flight response was up and powered so that the body can get out of that traumatic situation. Therefore, the memory of that event hasn't been processed properly because it wasn't being filed as a memory. This means that when a trigger happens, so for example, something that the brain associates with that event, let's say you were assaulted by somebody who was drinking, or you were in a car accident, the sound of screeching brakes or the smell of alcohol could trigger a flashback because the brain is saying, what's the first thing that I have in my awareness that relates to this experience that I'm having right now? The smell of alcohol. Oh, wait, what's this? I haven't processed this event as a memory. And it brings it back to the front of your mind and you relive the whole experience as your brain tries to process this as a memory. So because it hasn't already been processed as a memory, this means that the brain doesn't recognize that this event isn't happening again right at this very moment. This is a flashback. A flashback is when you re-experience something that happened, something traumatic, as though it was happening again at that moment. You can re-experience everything: sights, sounds, smells, feelings of touch, emotions, and it is very, very overwhelming and often painful. Just a side note, this is why that meme triggered isn't funny. Just saying. So, okay, that sounds easy enough in basic terms to understand. A flashback is when an event is called back to your mind and you re-experience the trauma. So, what else is there to talk about? What we haven't spoken about on this channel is that there are different types of flashbacks. It doesn't have to be you experiencing everything in one go all over again. Sometimes, because these events haven't been processed as a full memory, the brain has not processed it together. There could be different parts of this event that haven't been filed as a memory. For example, just the emotions, just the physical feelings, just the sense, sights, sounds that came with it. What most people know to be a flashback is when all of this happens at once. You're completely drawn back into that time. Your brain cannot associate that this isn't happening right now, cannot pick out that this event is over. So you may feel that you are in this specific time period. So for example, I have trauma from 2016. One of many, but I have trauma from 2016. And when I'm having a flashback, it is impossible to tell that I'm not in 2016. My brain does not function in the way that's telling me that this is over. You've lived a whole lot of years since then. It's 3 years later. It's 2019. This is over. It's done. You survived it and you're okay. When I'm in that flashback, even if someone is telling me it's 2019, it's 2019, my brain is saying it's 2016. It's 2016. This is happening right now. And this isn't just that you're, I don't know, being stubborn and thinking, no, this hurt me and I'm not ready to move on. Your brain literally hasn't processed this as a memory. Your whole brain, which controls everything in your body, is telling your whole body, this is happening right now. That's a full flashback. A full flashback is when you re-experience everything. Partial flashbacks can be things such as body memories. If you're having body memories or a physical flashback, you may not be re-experiencing the visual or sensory part of the memory if it were being processed as a memory, the event, just the physical sensations. This is why colloquially they are known as body memories, because your body is what's having the memory. It can be very, very confusing. You may not even realize you've been triggered, and sometimes this can come out of nowhere. There doesn't need to be a specific trigger in order for you to have a flashback. Sometimes your brain is just working through things in the background and, oh, what's this? Haven't filed this. Boom. And then all of a sudden, you're feeling everything. So there have been occasions where I've just been walking around the house doing housework, and you know, this can happen anywhere, anytime, to anybody with PTSD, when all of a sudden I can feel someone touching me, or burning me, or grabbing me. Depending on what your trauma is and what this flashback is about, you can feel what was happening. Your body remembers. You remember the physical sensations. So you might be able to feel somebody touching you or hurting you. Obviously, this can be very distressing because there's no way, that I've found at least, to make that stop. You just have to bear with it until your brain is done processing it. Some things that I've found help me, especially if these flashbacks are focused on the lower area of my body, the only thing I can do is pace. I need to keep my legs moving. If I sit still, I can go into a full flashback. So sometimes partial flashbacks can trigger full-on flashbacks. It can be very difficult. So body memories are physical re-experiencing of the sensations that come from that past trauma. There's also such a thing as an emotional flashback. An emotional flashback is when you re-experience the emotions that were happening around that trauma. So even if you're aware that there is no reason for you to be feeling scared, disgusted, ashamed, ill, or terrified, any of those feelings, angry, betrayed, those feelings are still gonna come on, and they can be very, very overwhelming. Again, this is your brain trying to process parts of the things that happened during that trauma. Emotional flashbacks can last for minutes, hours, days, weeks. You can be completely taken over by the emotions you were feeling when that trauma occurred, especially if that feeling was very overwhelming. It's going to be very overwhelming for you now. Feelings of being unsafe, being scared, being abandoned, whatever relates to your trauma. In your typical PTSD flashback, the individual who's having the flashback will be re-experiencing the event in general, the traumatic event, whereas in an emotional flashback, the individual who's been traumatized is instead revisiting the leftover, prolonged emotional impact of that event. It's complicated leftover emotions from trauma that could have happened directly after the trauma, directly before the trauma, during the trauma, that need to be dealt with. I think it goes without saying that this is extremely distressing. Other types of flashbacks that you can have can be sounds, just hearing sounds. So like I used the example of being in a car crash or an accident, the sound of screeching tires. If you were assaulted maybe, or you came from a broken home, the sound of yelling, hearing somebody's voice in your head screaming at you, or whatever is related to your trauma. Visuals, so you can have just the visual image of somebody coming at you to attack you, or what you saw in the car crash, the road coming up to meet you, whatever happened. Seeing the visual images, seeing that memory, but it's just visual. And it can be kind of like, you know, when you zone out, or if you dissociate, when you dissociate, it's kind of like being blinded. All you can see is that. And sometimes it's kind of like looking through a film. Somebody's holding up a relatively transparent piece of perspex, maybe, that's got drawings of memories on it. Something is behind that, which is the real world as it's happening right now. You might be able to see bits of it, but it's kind of like this overlay of this trauma memory. It's right in front of your face, and that's what you can see. This can obviously also happen with any of the senses, so smells work as well. You might suddenly remember the smell of someone's breath, or cigarette smoke, or alcohol, or blood, or the smell of somebody's perfume, smell of someone's house, smell of a hospital, anything. And it doesn't have to be something that seems obviously related to this trauma. So for example, if you were in a trauma that resulted in you being in hospital, it would make sense if it was a trigger, the smell of hospitals, right? But sometimes triggers can be absolutely bizarre. Even changes in the weather can be triggers for some people. Things that seem completely irrelevant that may have been involved around that time period, like a certain show, or even a type of fabric or a type of pattern that might have been on the walls or on the curtains, or that somebody might have been wearing. It can seem really bizarre. People might say, oh, I'm sorry, this is a trigger for me. And people will think, what? Don't be ridiculous. That's not what triggers are. That's obviously not connected to anything. It doesn't work like that. Anything can be a trigger. Anything can be a trigger. It's whatever your brain has latched onto and said, oh, wait, that reminds me of this. Let's bring it back up. It doesn't have to be obvious to you, whether you're the person with PTSD or you know and are supporting somebody with PTSD. Triggers don't have to make sense. What matters is that they are triggers, and it's how your brain is working to process this memory. There is no such thing as an impossible trigger. If you'd like to know more about PTSD, triggers, flashbacks, how this works in the brain, dissociation related to PTSD and trauma, please do have a look at the videos that we've made on it before. They are very in-depth, and I can guarantee that you will learn a lot. If that interests you, please do check it out. You'll be able to find it at the end of this video in a little card up here or in the description box below. Possibly all three if you're lucky. And if you are interested in dissociative identity disorder, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder, then that is mainly what this channel is about, alongside other mental illnesses that can come alongside it as comorbid disorders, or just in general for people who may need an explanation or some advice. Have a look at our channel if you are interested in the scientific, psychological, biological aspects of DID specifically, and PTSD, because DID is essentially a very extreme form of CPTSD. Then have a look at our Debunking DID series, and I hope that you find that this area of YouTube has a lovely supportive community. I feel like we have the most incredible community on this channel, so I hope that you'll be able to find people who can help you, support you, answer your questions if we don't get to you first. So thank you for coming on the channel. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you learned something, and remember to please stay safe. Lots of love, everybody. Bye.